we did yesterday, which was the first part and kind of just looking at the basic body forms of the phylum Cnidaria. So when we talk about cnidarians, we're talking about jellyfish, sea anemones, and they all have that radial symmetry. So there are two different forms, and the way I want you to remember this is that polyp goes up, so the tentacles are facing upwards, and the medusas face downwards. If you make the letter M with your fingers, kind of looks like a jellyfish. Check it out, all right? So these are polyps that can actually swim. In your notes yesterday, it had you look at the two different body structures in terms of some of the anatomical features. So we have the aboral surface and the oral surface. So wherever the mouth is the oral surface. So on a medusa, it's facing downwards, and then on a polyp, it's facing upwards. So basically, the oral surface is wherever the tentacles are on a cnidarian, which is kind of easy to remember. So today, we're talking about the different classes of cnidarians. And cnidarians can be broken down into a few different classes. The ones that we're going to look at today are the ones that you will have to know for the course. So the class Hydrozoa are cnidarians that are actually colonies of polyps. And these are referred to as siphonophores. And siphonophores are these colonial organisms. So, for example, the picture on the screen is of a Portuguese man-o-war, and a Portuguese man-o-war is actually a colonial organism, meaning that it has multiple animals that are all joined together and actually serve a function as one whole organism. So the float itself is different from the tentacles itself, and we call these things zooids. And these zooids are basically the little individual animals and organisms that make up these big cnidarians. All right, so here is the float itself. This is one particular organism. We've got tentacles that kind of range down, and all cnidarians are going to have these nematocysts. So these basically little firing barbs. So when there's pressure, they become discharged, and this is where the stinging comes from. All right, here's another little lovely picture of a Portuguese man-o-war, a siphonophore, which is once again a colonial organism. They have multiple organisms all joined together. All right, the next class of cnidarians we're going to look at are the class Scyphozoa and the class Cubozoans. All right, so Scyphozoa are our common jellyfish. These are the ones that you'll see in the aquariums and stuff like this. So our moon jellies and some of our other not box jellyfish, cannonball jellies and stuff like that. Another class is the cubozoans. You do have to remember this one. So think cube is like a square. This is your box jellyfish. And your box jellyfish are actually the most lethal jellies in the world. And they have been known to sting and eventually cause death with humans. So they are super, super small. They're only about this big. They have long tentacles that hang off of them, which can then wrap around an organism, and all those barbs are continuing to fire. All right, so here's a white box jellyfish. For the most part, you know, the running joke is that everything in Australia can kill you. We find a lot of these white box jellyfish in the Australian and New Zealand waters. All right, I am going to link this video. I do want y'all to watch this. This is the Oprah interview with Diana Nyad, and she is a transoceanic swimmer. She swims down off the coast of Florida, so from Florida to Cuba, she swims back and forth, which is an immense amount of mileage if you think about it. And she has been stung by box jellyfish, and it shows the footage from the documentary that they were filming while she was swimming. And it kind of shows, you know, what exactly happens to her body. It goes into shock, and she starts to have issues breathing and controlling her muscles in the water. So they end up having to shoot her with multiple different types of steroids and prednisone and adrenaline in order to keep her going and keep her body safe. These other links are very interesting because it is showing a guy that actually is trying to find an anti-venom for the box jellyfish. So he walks around and stings himself with them all day long. So it kind of shows you what exactly that looks like. And what the resulting effects on the skin of a human look like after being stung by a box jellyfish. So jellyfish can range in a variety of sizes. These are all scyphozoans. So these are common jellies. These, like I said, are the ones that you're going to see in the waters where we swim. You're going to see them in the aquariums, just because these are our largest class. This is the most common jellies. So they can get huge. These are giant cannonball jellyfish. And you can kind of see, what those look like. In terms of barbs and the firing of the barbs off of the tentacles, this is what a Portuguese man-o-war sting looks like. And then this is a box jellyfish sting. This is on a person with a little bit more melanin in their skin, so you can kind of see they have a darker skin tone than the person on the left. So it makes it a little bit harder to see the actual sting marks, but you can still see the dark areas all over the body, all over that leg, and those are all tentacle sting marks from those barbs. All right, our other class of cnidarians that we're going to look at two more, or just, I can't remember, I think it's just one more for today. So the class Anthozoa are our polyps. So whenever we think Anthozoa, I want you to think sea anemones, think A and A. So these are our polyp forms. They do not have a medusa stage. So they will never turn upside down and swim around. They will actually already be attached to a particular surface. So these would be things like sea anemones and corals. And corals, usually when we think of it, we think of like coral reefs. Well, the corals themselves are cnidarians. What we see as the reef is actually the deposits from those corals. So that's actually a skeleton, a calcium carbonate skeleton that's formed as a result of secretions from those corals. So they don't have a medusa stage. These are our most diverse, and we can find them either as solitary polyps, meaning just one, or colonial polyps, meaning that there are multiple organisms that go into that polyp itself. All right, so sea anemone itself, check that out. This is the ones that we think of when we see like Finding Nemo, but this is what we will be looking at in terms of the diagram, and this is what my actual sea anemone specimens look like as well. So of course they're not brightly colored anymore. When I show you these on Monday, you're gonna be like, ew, that's disgusting looking. But sea anemones themselves are actually pretty cool things. So sea anemone, oh my gosh, I can't say it today. Sea anemones, holy cow, are typically very colorful. Lots of bright pinks and oranges and reds, even some yellows, but they are large polyp forms. So remember that a polyp has the oral surface on the top, the mouth is on the top, and then the tentacles face upwards. On the bottom side, and we saw this with our symmetry stations when I showed you that sea anemone, they have a very flat bottom part that helps it to attach to that surface or that substrate, and that's referred to as the petal disc. That petal disc is what helps to attach it to whatever surface it is on. All right, here's some lovely sea anemones. You can see this one kind of has like a yellowy olive color with some blue tentacles. The giant sea anemones range in different colors. This one is like a bright purple and blue. All right, and then our class Anthozoa also has our corals in it. So like I said, the corals are secreting that calcium carbonate skeleton, and that's what's forming the reef itself. So the coral reef itself is actually just that calcium carbonate skeleton that they are secreting. So then when we talk about ocean acidification and our corals are dying, that's when we're left with what we refer to as coral bleaching. And that's just all the colors are gone from this calcium carbonate skeleton because all those corals are dead. And it's just left that white chalky skeleton behind. All right, we have already mentioned zooxanthellae. These are, this is a little review from Unit 5, so notice that we're re-looping back to what we talked about before. So dinoflagellates that actually live within the coral polyps are these zooxanthellae, and they have this symbiotic relationship with the coral themselves, so they're providing these nutrients for the coral. Oh, I got ahead of myself. Here we go, looking at coral bleaching. So coral bleaching occurs when there is too much carbon dioxide in the water, and we end up with that ocean acidification. It also can result from global warming as a whole, so the temperatures of the water getting a little too warm for that coral to survive and for that zooxanthellae to survive. So the zooxanthellae die, they have that symbiotic relationship, they're the one providing nutrients for the coral, and then the corals eventually die as well. then leaving this kind of like white area, this kind of bleached out area. Alrighty, last little slides I do want to look at is a little bit about the biology and behavior of cnidarians themselves. So they are organized at the tissue level. They do not have organs. So when we talked about sponges, we talked about how sponges were organized at the cellular level, and we're going to kind of move up from there in terms of complexity. All right, so they are carnivores. They do use their nematocyst to sting and to capture their prey. So we saw in the picture of the Portuguese man of war that it kind of wrapped around the fish, and that's exactly what it does. They do only have one body opening, which is the mouth, and that leads to this gastrovascular cavity. So basically they're almost like hollow inside. And you can go back and look at your diagram for both the polyp form and the medusa form, and notice that it's got that giant gastrovascular cavity in there. All right, cnidarians do not have a brain. However, as we start to get more and more complex with our organisms, we're going to see that they do have another type of system in there that basically transmits impulses, and this is called a nerve net. So some cnidarians do have primitive photoreceptors, and that's basically just a really big word for primitive eyes. And remember, the word primitive means like very rudimentary or very simple. All right, so they have these very simple photoreceptors. They can just sense light and dark. So if you wave your hand over a cnidarian, sometimes they'll kind of close up or they'll swim away, and that's all because they notice the difference between shadows and light. In terms of respiration and circulation, man, I'm having trouble talking today. These are all by the process of diffusion. So remember when we talked about diffusion in Unit 4, we said that that is molecules moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. And this is basically what happens across the body membrane. So they will diffuse gases across the membrane and water across the membranes as well. So they are basically absorbing oxygen from the water and then releasing that carbon dioxide back out into the water. Rather than us breathing it in and out, they're just kind of letting it go through their skin, which is kind of cool. They do not have a circulatory system in terms of body reproduction. All right, last little bit, because I only have about 2 minutes left on this recording, is that we have to look at a particular species called a immortal jellyfish. And the immortal jellyfish is one that scientists are still studying, but this is the life cycle of the immortal jellyfish. So they start as a polyp. That polyp buds through the process of asexual reproduction. It becomes this cute little floating baby jellyfish, becomes an adult medusa. That adult medusa then actually turns back into a polyp and continues the life process. So the image on the screen is showing you the typical life process of a cnidarian in general, but the immortal jellyfish will actually skip the middle stage of reproducing again and will pop back into the polyp form, bud again, and then continue on its life cycle after it's kind of regenerated some of itself, which is pretty cool.